I hope my voice will stay with you through today's meeting. This is a bit of a different one than the usual monthly review, but I originally just kind of made an overview for myself, and then I felt very inspired afterwards, and I thought it would be cool to share with all of you. And it's basically kind of an overview of how the Thousand Brains project can have a positive impact on the world in the near, medium, and long term, and what kind of applications we can already think of. I mean, we always say like, we'll probably have tons of applications that we can't even imagine right now, but there are already so many things that we can imagine that are not that far off, and just kind of showing how the things on our research roadmap play into actual impact in the real world. So how I kind of structured this is that we have a couple of key capabilities on the research roadmap. You can probably think of them like modeling compositional objects, object behaviors, being able to manipulate the world. And each of these key capabilities unlocks a whole new range of applications. And so I kind of tried to structure it by that. So currently we can do object and pose recognition, and in terms of applications, we could do this within existing robotics pipelines, such as manufacturing, where, I mean, there are tons of papers out there that try to solve this just kind of object and pose detection, and there are lots of industrial applications where you need to detect parts and the pose of them, and then you have a gripper that then can pick them up, or you detect the pose of boxes, and then you have something that can pick them up and move them around in a warehouse, stuff like that. So that's current solutions. There are some current solutions, but it's definitely not a solved problem, and they particularly struggle with like changes in lighting, objects occluding each other, changes from the training distribution, like a different texture on the box, like if Amazon suddenly prints differently on its packages, and then you need to rearrange them. So such pipelines Monty could already be plugged into, and we can already kind of work close that we would be able to evaluate on some of these 6 degree of freedom object and pose detection benchmarks. And like what we show in the DMC paper, the benefits of our approach are the reduced cost in training and data collection, being robust, being able to do continual learning and quickly adapt to new conditions, and generalize to objects with similar shapes. But then the next thing on our research roadmap, something we plan on being able to do in the summer, is to model compositional objects. So actually stacking learning modules on top of each other and using hierarchy to model compositional objects. And that then unlocks much more complex object recognition tasks. So one application we talked a lot about lately is ultrasound. And why is this kind of relevant? So a big thing is that in a lot of remote areas, there aren't trained physicians to actually administer an ultrasound. And ultrasound is a really crucial technique for lots of different diseases, but also particularly maternal health, checking on that the baby is healthy, the age of the baby, and it can have a lot of implications if you're able to do those scans in remote areas. And if you can use these mobile devices in combination with AI, they can become usable by untrained physicians. And there are a couple of existing AI solutions, like blind sweeps, where you basically scan the belly of the mother in pre-described movements and then use AI to determine fetal age, for example, which work quite well, but they require collecting large data sets. Niels and I just talked to someone yesterday who mentioned like 10,000 subjects to train their model on, whereas Monty won't require collecting large data sets, which means it can also be used for more rare conditions, and is generally just much cheaper to train it for other things besides fetal age. It can also learn continually and kind of adapt in the application to the specific population where it's being used. it can suggest where to move the probe to get necessary information instead of having like these pre-described movements. It can detect abnormalities without training on examples of them. That's a big one, because Monty, you could train it on only healthy fetuses, and Monty makes prediction when it sees a new fetus. And if those predictions are wrong, it has a high prediction error. It can recognize whether there's like a abnormality, like something is misshaped, and then refer that person to a clinic to get further checks. Without ever needing to train on examples of these problems. And then it's also much more interpretable since we have these structured models, which is good in medical applications. And yeah, just some examples are like, yeah, in maternal health would be like determining fetal age, the age of the baby, then also things like breech babies, babies that are in the wrong position, because Monty can actually detect the pose of the object as well. It can also detect relative locations of objects, so placenta previa, where the placenta is in a wrong position relative to the baby, or malformations. So lots of opportunities that could be explored there that we're actually currently looking into more. I'll have more on it in the monthly review slides. Then there are a bunch of other remote sensing applications, particularly in healthcare, that we recently talked a bit more about because that's the focus of the Gates Foundation as well. For example, detecting anemia in pregnant women to know whether to give IV fluids without having to do a blood draw. They take videos of the eye and the tongue, and then you can determine from that, you could predict whether they have anemia. But since they're already taking videos, that's something that Monty could potentially improve on. Other things would be like drones for larval source management of malaria mosquitoes, or drones that survey health and water access in remote communities or deliver medicine there. This is a bit more of an abstract one, but that we've tried Monty on before and realized it will need compositional objects. It's just one of these benchmark data sets in the AI community where there's very little data available, just a few examples of handwritten digits and in different alphabets, and then it has to learn from them. And it's kind of sensory motor in the sense that we follow the strokes, learn these digits. And it's one of these data sets that show how AI can't learn from those small data sets. Another one, just generally mapping disaster zones with drones or other kind of robots that go in there and build a structured model of what's going on. And then also scene understanding in just kind of existing pipelines, like maybe like, again, warehouses, stacking boxes on top of each other, understanding not to grab the bottom box in a stack of boxes, but the top one. And then this one was something I also didn't think about before, but apparently like waste management is a big deal that's not really solved yet. There are like some automated systems that can reach accuracy of like 85 to 95% to identify some types of recyclables, but it's definitely not great, and a lot of times still use humans just to sort waste. And it particularly has problems with deformations of objects like crushed Coke cans and stuff like that, and also like the variety of textures. Like you could imagine a can have so many different labels on it that it's just hard to collect a large enough data set to recognize all of them. Whereas Monty could just kind of recognize the general shape of a can independent of the label. And I put this kind of in blue plus deformations here because just adding compositional objects in this case wouldn't be enough, because currently we can't deal with object deformations either. And then, yeah, generally structured knowledge representations to have better search, making new connections, and teaching and learning. And I asked ChatGPT to generate an image for this. which is this what it came up with. And then I asked it to make it more concrete and put an example on it, which I just included because I thought it was such a great example about how current AI is not good at this, because it wrote like the apple has flavor red, and apple is a concept, and the plant is made of apple. So I think if Monty can represent more abstract knowledge and have more of associative connections, we could do much better than this. Yeah, then the next big kind of watershed capability is modeling object behaviors and a dynamic world, like a world where objects are actually moving and not just recognizing static objects and object behaviors, which is what we're currently brainstorming a lot around. And that would, again, help with ultrasound, where we actually have moving components like a beating heart or lungs or even a fetus moving around, and where we need to either recognize the behavior itself or at least be able to compensate for the movement of the objects. Then, yeah, anything in the kind of self-driving cars or transportation area where we have lots of moving objects that we need to recognize and anticipate and know their pose. A grounded language understanding, which would could be used to combat misinformation, which might be a prevalent topic lately. But yeah, also generally just having a grounded language understanding with less hallucinations or no hallucinations like large language models have would be really beneficial. And then, yeah, a big sector is generally agriculture at this point. So like weed detection, disease detection, pest prevention and detection. There are tons of agricultural robots, and lots of people try to apply AI to it. And a lot of them are sensory motor systems. So I think Monty could also have a big impact there. And agriculture is so important for the world to supply food, that, yeah, could be a very positive impact. On a more abstract level, cybersecurity. Modeling protein dynamics is an interesting one. I don't have a lot of knowledge about this. I supervised like one thesis around it. But basically, we have big static data sets of proteins, but not of their dynamic states because they're really hard to record. And we can do physics simulations, but they are very expensive and they only work on small timescales. And there are some machine learning methods that can do approximations like graph neural networks and variational autoencoders, but they kind of lose their physical coding very quickly and start to hallucinate and require large data sets or overfit. But being able to model the dynamic states of proteins is super important for all kinds of medical and pharmaceutical applications. So yeah, this is literally a quote, it would be $1 trillion industry if solved and change the face of medicine. So like this is a huge impact on, I'm not sure if Monty could actually do this because it seems like a very, like I don't know enough about it to be able to say how we would solve it, but it's an interesting one to think about if we could model object behaviors, whether we could have an impact there. And just generally understanding how these wiggly proteins move and interact is useful to understand misfoldings like in Alzheimer's, mutation effects and signaling, but also like how pharmaceuticals would actually have an effect in the body. And then not as real world, but I think Tristan, you shared the second version of it yesterday. The ARC challenge, which is like this benchmark for AGI, which yeah, I think Monty could do really well once we add these capabilities. Since it's like very little data to learn from, a lot of reasoning and structured knowledge that needs to be extrapolated, which Monty is really well made for. And then, yeah, the next big watershed capability, manipulating the world. And that gets us into all these new exciting things, like anything in robotics. So like caretaking, where we currently have less and less humans who want to do these things and more people who need caretaking. So that would definitely be something of use. Home helpers. There's like this quote where it's like, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. Um, so hopefully Monty can be that kind of AI, so we can do the things that we actually enjoy doing. Um, and then, yeah, just dangerous jobs, mining, construction, firefighters, police, where some people are dabbling into robotics, but definitely not as general solutions as would be useful. Um, and then, yeah, space exploration. Again, a lot of space is very hostile towards humans, so we use a lot of robots for this, especially on Mars. So having more intelligent robots would be very useful for that. And then again, agriculture, if we can actually manipulate the world instead of just detecting stuff, it opens up all these new things like automated picking and sorting and spraying and pruning and all this kind of stuff. And then this one was pretty exciting too, like we talked about before, AI scientists that actually design and run experiments, and the sensory motor system is basically coming up with the hypothesis and designing an experiment and then running that experiment and looking at the results and coming up with another experiment, which could have all kinds of implications, curing diseases, solutions to climate change, drought-resistant crops, renewable energies, developing vaccines quickly, and so on. And then, yeah, generally tying into that also logical reasoning doesn't need to necessarily be running experiments, but it could be logical reasoning for other things.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Can you expand a little bit just on the how manipulating the world leads into logical reasoning?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I put it here because um, it felt like manipulate, like knowing how to move through the world would be similar to moving through conceptual space internally. So basically manipulating concepts in your head and imagining different combinations of them would be similar to actually manipulating objects in the world and putting them into different configurations, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Well, yeah, feel free to interrupt. Um, Almost done too. So yeah, last one I just kind of put plus plus for all the other capabilities, and I already kind of peppered in a couple of other things in here in blue. Um, but yeah, basically having multi-agent systems, which might be pretty natural generalization since we already have these general learning modules that can talk to each other. So it's probably it can probably generalize easily to them being separate agents and still talking to each other. Um, and then, yeah, generally representing abstract concepts, which we're also hoping will kind of generalize out of our algorithm without us having to add a specific mechanism for it. But we'll have to see about that. Scale and deformations and theory of mind, which again plays a bit into the multi-agent thing. And that's really now this kind of robots on Mars example, where Mars is really not a place for humans to go and start building stuff there, but more a place where robots would need to go first and build a colony. And it's such a different environment that it's hard to imagine how they would be pre-trained on large amounts of data on Earth and then go there and be able to do the stuff. And it would really need more of an intelligence like ours that can generalize and extrapolate to new environments um, to actually be efficient here, not break down when they encounter an unknown problem. Education, so one, yeah, potentially actual AI teaching children or adults but then also understanding intelligence in humans, which will be one thing that I'm hoping will come out of this whole project as well, like a full understanding of how our brain works, which then should help treat mental disorders and also for us to know the best way to actually teach children and learn about the world. So yeah, the big theme is the hope is that this will make the world a safer and healthier place, raise everyone's standard of living, solve current problems and existential risks, and also applications we can't even conceive of today.